The gates of time open, the modern world dissolves, and something extraordinary takes its place. The air here is thick with the scent of copal incense and lake water. Behind these shoulders, the twin shrines of the Templo Mayor rise 60 meters into a sky streaked with gold, their freshly painted facades blazing in red and blue against the volcanic peaks of Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. Below, causeways stretch like white ribbons across the shimmering turquoise surface of Lake Texcoco, connecting an island city of 200,000 souls to the mainland. Canoes glide between floating gardens heavy with maize and amaranth. This is Tenochtitlan, and it is alive. But this city did not appear from nothing. Its story begins centuries before these temples were ever imagined, in a mythic homeland called Aztlan, the place of white herons, where a wandering people known as the Mexica heard the voice of their war god Huitzilopochtli and began a migration that would last generations. They wandered through arid highlands, despised by every city-state they encountered, enslaved, cast out, forced to survive on the margins of the Valley of Mexico. And then, in the year 1325, on a marshy island where an eagle perched upon a cactus devouring a serpent, they planted the foundations of what would become one of the largest cities on earth. We will journey from that very beginning, from the departure out of Aztlan around the 12th century, through every stage of this civilization's astonishing arc. We will witness how a tribe of outcasts forged the Triple Alliance with Texcoco and Tlacopan, building a tributary empire that stretched from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific lowlands. We will walk through the great market of Tlatelolco, where 60,000 people traded cacao, jade, and quetzal feathers each day. We will examine obsidian blades sharper than surgical steel, turquoise mosaic masks of breathtaking precision, and featherwork headdresses containing over 400 iridescent quetzal plumes. We will stand beside poets who spoke of flower and song, and beside warriors who waged flower wars for purposes both sacred and political. And we will not look away from the fractures. The tributary peoples who seethed under imperial demands, the omens that haunted Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, the strangers who arrived from the sea in 1519, the 75-day siege that reduced this magnificent city to rubble by August of 1521. We will follow this story to its very end, and then beyond, because the Aztec world did not simply vanish. Nearly 2 million people still speak Nahuatl today. The eagle on the cactus flies on the flag of Mexico. Beneath the central plaza of Mexico City, archaeologists continue to unearth the buried heart of the Templo Mayor. This is not merely a history lesson. This is a complete journey through time, from mythic origins to living legacy, told across 20 immersive chapters that illuminate how religion, agriculture, warfare, trade, and art wove together to create one of humanity's most remarkable civilizations. Some of the greatest mysteries of human achievement lie embedded in these stones, in these painted codices, in the very soil beneath a modern capital of millions. By the end of this series, the Aztec world will no longer feel distant or alien. It will feel vivid, complex, and startlingly close to our own. If these complete journeys through ancient civilizations speak to something in you, please subscribe so you never miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a lost world, told with the care and detail it deserves. Now, let us begin our journey, back to the beginning, back to Aztlan, where the white herons circle above still waters and a people prepare to walk into history. Somewhere in the dry country of the north, where dust lifts from cracked earth and settles on stone, a people carry a god on their backs. They move in small bands through scrubland and thorn forest, their sandals worn thin, their bundles wrapped in maguey fibre. They are the Mexica, and they are leaving the only home their stories will ever name. That home is Aztlan. The word itself means the place of whiteness, or perhaps the place of herons. Later painted manuscripts, among them the Codex Boturini, will depict it as an island set in a pale lake, a place of canoes and reeds and long-legged birds standing motionless in shallow water. Whether Aztlan exists as a physical location in the arid reaches of what is now northwestern Mexico, or whether it lives only in the architecture of collective memory, remains one of Mesoamerican history's most enduring questions. Scholars have proposed sites in Nayarit, in the lake country of Jalisco, even as far north as the American Southwest. No excavation has settled the matter. What survives is the story itself, and the story is enough to set a civilization in motion. Around the early 12th century of the Common Era, the Mexica depart. They are one of several Nahuatl-speaking groups migrating southward during this period, peoples collectively identified as Chichimeca, a term carrying connotations of both wildness and ancestral legitimacy. They are hunters and gatherers who know the bow, the obsidian-tipped dart, and the seasonal rhythms of nopal fruit and mesquite. They travel not as a single column, but as a loose confederation of calpulli, the kinship-based social units that organize labor, distribute land, and maintain ritual obligations. Each calpulli carries its own sacred bundle, its own patron spirit, its own internal leadership. Together they form a fragile but resilient social body. At the center of this migration stands the cult of Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird of the south, a solar and martial deity whose priests carry his idol wrapped in cloth and speak his commands to the assembled bands. According to the sacred histories later recorded in the Codex Aubin and the Chronica Mexicayotl, it is Huitzilopochtli who orders the departure from Aztlan. It is his voice, channeled through priest-carriers called Teomamake, that dictates the direction of travel, the places of rest, and the signs that will mark the journey's end. The landscape they cross is harsh and luminous. Volcanic mesas stretch toward distant sierras. Arroyos cut through red earth. Camps appear and vanish, leaving behind fire-cracked stone and the faint residue of roasted agave. Obsidian, that volcanic glass sharper than surgical steel, serves as blade, scraper, and trade good. Small caches of it travel with the bands, sourced from deposits scattered across the Central Highlands. These are not yet temple builders. They possess no monumental architecture, no written legal codes, no standing armies. What they possess is a narrative of divine election, a conviction that their wandering is not exile but pilgrimage. Each generation passes the story forward. Each campfire becomes a temporary altar. The god travels with them, and because the god travels, the people remain a people. The migration will last generations. It will carry the Mexica through territories controlled by older, more powerful civilizations. It will test them with hunger, warfare, and humiliation. But in these earliest decades of movement, sometime in the 12th century, the essential elements of Mexica identity crystallize in the dust of the northern plateau. A patron deity who demands obedience and promises glory. A social structure built on the calpulli, flexible enough to survive displacement. An origin story that transforms landlessness into sacred purpose. The herons of Aztlan fade behind them. Ahead, still more than a century distant, a lake shimmers in a valley ringed by volcanoes. The valley reveals itself slowly, a vast basin cradled between volcanic peaks. Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl rise to the southeast, their snow-capped summits catching morning light. Below them, an interconnected system of lakes stretches across the valley floor. Zumpango and Xaltocan to the north, Texcoco at the center, Xochimilco and Chalco to the south. The water shifts between brackish and fresh depending on seasonal rains and underground springs. Along the shores, established cities rise in terraced stone, their temples whitewashed and gleaming. This is the Valley of Mexico in the 13th century, and it is already old. The Toltec civilization, centered at Tula some 80 kilometers to the northwest, collapsed roughly a century before the Mexica arrive. But its legacy saturates every polity in the basin. To claim Toltec descent is to claim legitimacy. The ruling lineages of Culhuacan, situated on a peninsula jutting into the southern lakes, trace their ancestry directly to Toltec royalty. Azcapotzalco, the powerful Tepanec capital on the western shore, commands tribute from dozens of smaller settlements. Coatlichan and other Acolhua towns dominate the eastern lakeshore. These are not primitive villages. They are sophisticated city-states, Altepetl, with stone architecture, stratified social hierarchies, functioning tribute networks, and deep calendrical knowledge inherited from centuries of Mesoamerican civilization. Into this crowded political landscape, the Mexica descend, sometime in the early decades of the 13th century, carrying their bundled deity and their reputation for ferocity. They are not welcomed. The established peoples of the valley regard them as Chichimeca, a term denoting northern barbarians, people of the dog lineage, hunters who eat uncooked meat. The Mexica possess no city, no royal bloodline recognized by valley standards, no temple of cut stone. They are granted only the land no one else wants: rocky hillsides, snake-infested scrubland near Chapultepec, the margins where cultivated fields give way to marsh. At Chapultepec, the hill of the grasshopper, the Mexica attempt to establish a permanent settlement. The site offers fresh springs and a defensible elevation, but its strategic value makes it coveted. Around 1269, a coalition of neighboring Altepetl, likely including Culhuacan and the Tepanecs, attacks the Mexica encampment. The defeat is devastating. Their leader, Huitzilihuitl the Elder, is captured and sacrificed. The survivors scatter. Some are taken as captives to Culhuacan, where they are settled on the lava fields of Tizapan, a desolate stretch of hardened volcanic rock, thick with venomous serpents. The Culhua rulers expect the land to destroy them. It does not. The Mexica eat the serpents. They clear ground among the jagged stone. They serve Culhuacan as mercenary warriors, fighting with a brutality that earns grudging respect and deepening unease. In campaigns against neighboring Xochimilco, Mexica soldiers distinguished themselves, reportedly presenting severed ears as proof of their kills when other warriors offer captives. Their methods horrify even in a culture accustomed to ritual violence. This period of subjugation, lasting decades through the late 13th century, shapes the Mexica in ways the migration alone could not. They absorb Toltec cultural practices, architectural techniques, refined agricultural methods, the prestige dialect of Nahuatl spoken in Culhuacan's courts. They observe how legitimate power operates in the valley, through dynastic marriage, tributary obligation, and the careful performance of religious ceremony. They learn that survival requires not only martial skill, but political cunning. The lakeshore cities tolerate the Mexica as useful subordinates, dangerous enough to deploy against enemies, but too weak to threaten the existing order. The Mexica occupy this narrow space with a patience born of necessity. Their Calpulli structure holds them together. Their priests maintain the sacred fires. Their warriors build a reputation that precedes them into every negotiation. Somewhere in the reeds and brackish shallows of Lake Texcoco, an island sits unclaimed, too marshy and small for any established power to covet. The Mexica have not yet seen it, but the century of humiliation is forging the discipline, the hunger, and the political intelligence that will transform a despised band of wanderers into the founders of an empire. The island emerges from the shallows of Lake Texcoco like something half-remembered from a dream. It is small, swampy, ringed by reeds that bend under the weight of nesting herons. Mud sucks at every footfall. Snakes slide through the brackish water. No established power in the Valley of Mexico has claimed this place because no established power wants it. It is, by every practical measure, worthless land. Yet in the year 2 house by the Mexica calendar, 1325 by European reckoning, the wanderers stop here. The priests declare that the sign has been fulfilled. An eagle perches on a nopal cactus growing from the rocks, a serpent caught in its talons. Whether this moment unfolds exactly as later codices depict it, with the bird spreading its wings against a pale sky, the image becomes the foundational act of a civilization. The Codex Mendoza, painted nearly 2 centuries later, places this scene at the center of its opening page, the eagle framed by the blue waters of the lake, the crossed canals of the new city radiating outward in 4 cardinal directions. The first structures are humble beyond imagination. Reed huts cluster on the marshy ground. The shrine to Huitzilopochtli is built of wood and thatch, barely distinguishable from the dwellings surrounding it. There is no stone, no stucco, no grandeur. The Mexica dig into the lake bed with wooden tools, piling mud and vegetation to create the earliest chinampas, rectangular plots anchored by willow roots that will, over generations, transform open water into arable land. They weave mats from tule reeds. They fish the lake for protein. They trap waterfowl and harvest spirulina from the alkaline waters. The island's geography, so apparently hostile, contains hidden advantages. Water provides a natural moat against attack. The lake teems with resources. Canoe travel connects the settlement to every shore of the valley. The Mexica begin to exploit these advantages with the same tenacity that sustained them through 2 centuries of migration and servitude. Shortly after the founding of Tenochtitlan, a faction splits away and establishes Tlatelolco on a neighboring island to the north. The 2 communities share language, lineage, and religious tradition, but they develop as distinct political entities with separate rulers. Tlatelolco will eventually become the commercial heart of the Aztec world, its marketplace legendary across Mesoamerica, but in these early decades it is simply another cluster of reed huts on reclaimed marshland. Both settlements exist under the shadow of Azcapotzalco. The Tepanec ruler Tezozomoc, shrewd and long-lived, permits the Mexica to remain on their island in exchange for tribute and military service. The arrangement is unequal but survivable. Mexica warriors fight in Tepanek campaigns, gaining battlefield experience and a share of captured spoils. Tribute flows westward across the lake in canoes laden with fish, aquatic plants, and the labor of Mexica hands. The early Tlatoc remain unnamed in the most reliable sources for these founding decades, though oral tradition later credits the city's organization to leaders who divided the island into 4 great quarters, each aligned with a cardinal direction, each administered through the Calpulli system carried intact from the years of wandering. These 4 Campan, Moyotlan, Teopan, Atzacoalco, and Cuepopan establish the spatial logic that will govern Tenochtitlan for the next 2 centuries. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the island grows. Each season the chinampas extend farther into the lake. Each year the population increases as the settlement absorbs newcomers and as families expand under relatively stable conditions. The wooden shrine to Huitzilopochtli receives its first modest improvements. The canals between chinampas become navigable waterways, the embryonic grid of a city that does not yet know what it will become. Smoke from cooking fires drifts across the water at dusk, mingling with mist rising from the lake surface. The mountains stand in silhouette against the fading sky. On this unpromising scrap of swamp, in the shadow of greater powers, the Mexica begin to build. Azcapotzalco sits on the western shore of Lake Texcoco, its palace complex sprawling across a low rise of packed earth and cut stone. Tepanek lords have ruled this city for generations, and by the mid-14th century their power extends across much of the valley. Tezozomoc, the shrewd and long-lived ruler who will govern Azcapotzalco for decades, presides over a tributary network that binds dozens of smaller settlements to his will. Tenochtitlan is one of them. The young island city pays tribute in fish, aquatic birds, and labor. Mexica warriors fight in Tepanek campaigns, bleeding for a sovereign who is not their own. This is the price of survival. Yet even vassalage can be turned to advantage. Around 1375, the Mexica elevate Acamapichtli as their first Tlatoani. His selection is no accident. Through his mother's lineage, Acamapichtli carries the blood of Culhuacan, the city-state that traces its ancestry to the legendary Toltecs of Tula. In Mesoamerican political culture, Toltec descent confers legitimacy the way gold confers wealth. It transforms the possessor. By installing a ruler with Culhua roots, the Mexica graft themselves onto the most prestigious genealogical tree in the valley. Acamapichtli's reign, lasting roughly 20 years, sees the first replacement of reed and thatch structures with modest stone buildings. Canal networks deepen and multiply. The Calpulli quarters grow denser as the population swells with immigrants and captives absorbed into the community. Acamapichtli fathers children with women from multiple Calpulli, deliberately weaving noble lineage into the fabric of every neighborhood. When he dies around 1395, the network of kinship he has planted will bear fruit for generations. His successor, Huitzilopochtli, ascends around 1396 and pursues the strategy of dynastic marriage with even greater precision. He weds a granddaughter of Tezozomoc himself, binding Tenochtitlan to Azcapotzalco through the most intimate of political bonds. The tribute burden eases. Tenochtitlan gains access to cotton, a luxury the island cannot produce, and Mexica weavers begin crafting the fine mantles that will later fill imperial storehouses. Under Huitzilopochtli, the city's infrastructure matures. Stone-lined canals carry fresh water and canoe traffic through an expanding grid. The chinampa fields push outward into the lake, each new plot anchored with willow stakes and layered with fertile mud dredged from the shallows. The temple to Huitzilopochtli receives its first significant enlargement, rising above the surrounding rooftops in rough-hewn Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan is still modest by valley standards, but it is no longer a reed village. It is becoming a city. Huitzilopochtli dies around 1417, and his son Chimalpopoca inherits the reed mat of rulership. He is young, closely tied to his grandfather Tezozomoc, and the alliance with Azcapotzalco holds firm. But Tezozomoc is ancient, and when he finally dies around 1426, the political architecture of the valley shudders. His son Maxtla seizes power in Azcapotzalco through violence, pushing aside the designated heir. Maxtla views the growing confidence of Tenochtitlan with suspicion. The bonds of kinship that protected the Mexica fray and snap. In 1427, Chimalpopoca is found dead. The sources differ on the precise circumstances. Some accounts describe assassination ordered by Maxtla, others suggest internal Mexica politics. But the result is unambiguous. The era of patient subordination ends in a single act of violence. Tenochtitlan's ruling council must now choose a new Tlatoani in the most dangerous moment the city has faced since its founding. A century of strategic marriages, quiet construction, and careful deference has built something real. A population approaching perhaps 40,000, a warrior class tested in Tepanek campaigns, a nobility woven from Kulhua and Tepanek bloodlines, and an infrastructure of stone and water that can sustain a siege. The island that began as a refuge for the unwanted has become a power that can no longer be safely ignored. Everything the Mexica have built now hangs on what happens next. The council chooses Itzcoatl. He is the son of Acamapichtli by a secondary wife, a man already past 50, hardened by decades of military service under Tepanek command. His selection in 1427 is not born of tradition, but of crisis. The Mexica need a war leader, and Itzcoatl has spent a lifetime studying how wars are won. At his side stands his nephew Tlacaelel, a figure whose influence will reshape everything the Mexica believe about themselves. Tlacaelel assumes the title of Chihuacoatl, a position that combines the functions of chief advisor, supreme judge, and domestic administrator. Together, these two men transform a tributary city-state into the core of an empire. Maxtla of Azcapotzalco moves quickly to tighten his grip on the valley. He demands increased tribute. He positions garrisons along the causeways. Some among the Mexican nobility counsel submission, arguing that resistance against the Tepanek Empire is suicidal. But Itzcoatl and Tlacaelel press for war, and they possess a crucial advantage, a network of alliances cultivated through a century of intermarriage and shared resentment. The most important of these allies is Nezahualcoyotl, the exiled prince of Texcoco, who has spent years gathering support among disaffected Acolhua lords after Tezozomoc's forces seized his father's throne. Nezahualcoyotl brings not only warriors, but legitimacy, the prestige of the Toltec-descended Texcocan royal line. The war erupts in 1428. Fighting concentrates along the lake causeways and shoreline towns where canoe fleets clash amid the reeds. Tepanek forces are formidable but stretched thin, their subject peoples unreliable. The city of Tlacopan, a minor Tepanek dependency on the western shore, defects to the Mexica cause, providing a critical foothold on the mainland. The combined forces of Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan close on Azcapotzalco from multiple directions. The siege is brutal. When the city falls, its great palace complex burns. Maxtla is hunted down and killed. The Tepanec capital, which dominated the valley for generations, is reduced to a tributary town, its marketplace converted into a slave market in deliberate humiliation. From this victory emerges the Triple Alliance, the Excan Tlatoloyan, the tribunal of 3 seats. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan divide the spoils of conquest according to a formula that grants Tenochtitlan and Texcoco each 2/5 of all future tribute, with 1/5 reserved for Tlacopan. In practice, Tenochtitlan's military dominance ensures its primacy from the beginning. Tlacaelel now undertakes something unprecedented. He orders the burning of the old codices, the painted histories on bark paper that record the Mexica past as wanderers, servants, and vassals. In their place, new histories are commissioned. These rewritten accounts elevate Huitzilopochtli from a tribal patron deity to a cosmic force, the sun itself requiring perpetual nourishment through human sacrifice to prevent the destruction of the world. The Mexica are reimagined not as former refugees, but as a chosen people destined to sustain the 5th sun. This ideological revolution provides the spiritual architecture for everything that follows: the flower wars, the mass sacrificial ceremonies, the insatiable demand for captives that will define the empire's relationship with its neighbors for nearly a century. Conquered Tepanec lands are redistributed among Mexica warriors and nobles, creating a new landed aristocracy whose wealth and status depend directly on military expansion. The old Calpulli-based land tenure begins to shift toward a more hierarchical system. Itzcoatl oversees the expansion of Tenochtitlan's sacred precinct, enlarging the Templo Mayor and adding new temples to accommodate the amplified ritual calendar. Stone construction accelerates across the island city. Causeways are widened and reinforced. By the time of Itzcoatl's death in 1440, the transformation is complete. The Mexica are no longer vassals. They are conquerors with a divine mandate, a rewritten past, and a military machine tested against the strongest power in the valley. The marshy island refuge has become the seat of an alliance that controls the heart of central Mexico, and its ambitions are only beginning to unfold. Moctezuma Ilhuicamina ascends to the reed mat throne in 1440, a warrior already proven in campaigns against Cuernavaca and the Huastec frontier. His name means "he who shoots the sky with an arrow," and the decades ahead will justify it. Beside him stands Tlacaelel, the Cihuacoatl, architect of ideology and statecraft, who will serve as chief counselor through this reign and beyond, declining the throne itself to wield power from its shadow. The first years bring consolidation. Armies push eastward into the Gulf Coast lowlands, where Totonac and Huastec towns yield tribute in vanilla, liquid rubber, and brilliant tropical feathers. Coixtlahuacan in the Mixtec Highlands falls after a campaign that opens the route toward Oaxaca's valleys, where gold dust washes down from mountain streams and skilled artisans produce turquoise mosaics of extraordinary refinement. Each conquered Altepetal receives a tribute assessment recorded by imperial scribes on sheets of amate bark paper. The lists are precise. From one province, 400 cotton mantles and 20 bags of cacao every 80 days. From another, jade beads, jaguar skins, bundles of quetzal plumes bound with cord. The Codex Mendoza, painted decades later but reflecting this system's architecture, catalogues the staggering flow of goods converging on Tenochtitlan's storehouses. Then the rains fail. The year One Rabbit, 1454 in the European calendar, marks the nadir of a famine that has gripped the valley since 1450. Frost destroys the maize. Lake levels drop. Families sell children into slavery among the Totonacs of the coast, where harvests still hold. The crisis is remembered for generations as a catastrophe that tested the empire's legitimacy and its theology. Tlacaelel and Moctezuma respond with intensified ritual. The gods must be fed so that the sun continues its passage and the rains return. When the drought finally breaks, the ideological conclusion is clear. Sacrifice sustains the cosmic order, and the empire exists to provide it. From this conviction emerges the institution of the Xochiaoyotl, the Flower Wars. Formal arrangements are established with Tlaxcala, Huejotzingo, and Cholula, independent states encircled but never conquered. These are not wars of annihilation, but ritualized engagements designed to capture warriors for sacrifice and to keep armies battle-ready. The Flower Wars bind enemies in a paradox of mutual dependence and simmering hostility that will persist for decades. Tenochtitlan transforms physically under this reign. The Templo Mayor undergoes major expansion, its twin staircases climbing higher above the sacred precinct, the shrine of Huitzilopochtli painted in red ochre, the shrine of Tlaloc in blue. Volcanic Tezontle blocks are cut and fitted with increasing precision. A new aqueduct from Chapultepec springs channels fresh water across the lake on a raised stone causeway, solving the persistent problem of salinity in the surrounding waters. The chinampa system extends outward, rectangular plots of extraordinary fertility anchored by willow roots, producing maize, amaranth, squash, tomatoes, and chili peppers in rotations that yield multiple harvests each year. Tribute wealth reshapes the city's texture. Feather workers in the Amanteca quarter receive shipments of quetzal, cotinga, and roseate spoonbill plumes from distant provinces. Goldsmiths cast ornaments using the lost wax method. Storerooms fill with cotton mantles that function simultaneously as clothing, currency, and markers of social rank. The Pipiltin nobility display their status through jade lip plugs, gold ear spools, and cloaks of specific colors and patterns regulated by sumptuary law. By the time Moctezuma Ilhuicamina dies in 1469, the empire stretches from the Huastec north to the Mixtec south, from the Gulf lowlands toward the Pacific slope. Hundreds of Altepetal pay tribute through a system of provincial stewards and military garrisons. The ideological framework forged by Tlacaelel has fused warfare, religion, and economics into a single engine of expansion. The Templo Mayor rises above a city of perhaps 150,000 souls, its sacred precinct crowded with temples, skull racks, and sacrificial stones. Rivers of jade, gold, cacao, and feather flow inward along causeways and canoe routes, sustaining a metropolis that grows more magnificent and more dependent on conquest with each passing year. Axayacatl is young when he takes the reed mat, perhaps 20 years old, grandson of both Moctezuma Ilhuicamina and Itzcoatl, his bloodline impeccable. The year is 1469, and the empire he inherits is vast but restless, its tributary provinces stretching across hundreds of kilometers of mountain and jungle, its capital swelling with ambition. Tlacaelel, now ancient and indispensable, remains at his side as Cihuacoatl, the shadow architect whose counsel has shaped 3 reigns. The first crisis comes not from distant frontiers, but from within sight of the Templo Mayor. Tlatelolco, the twin island city founded alongside Tenochtitlan nearly a century and a half earlier, has grown into the commercial heart of the lake system. Its marketplace draws tens of thousands of traders daily, its stalls overflowing with obsidian blades from the Sierra de las Navajas, cacao from Soconusco, turquoise from the northern deserts, cotton mantles dyed with cochineal and indigo. Tlatelolco's ruler, Moquihuix, chafes under Tenochtitlan's dominance. Tensions between the 2 cities have simmered for decades, sharpened by dynastic insult and economic rivalry. In 1473, the conflict erupts. Axayacatl's forces cross the short distance between the islands and storm Tlatelolco's ceremonial center. Moquihuix is driven to the summit of Tlatelolco's Great Pyramid and thrown from its heights. The conquest is swift and decisive. Tlatelolco loses its independent Tlatoani forever, reduced to an administered district of Tenochtitlan. But its marketplace not only survives, it thrives under direct Mexica control, becoming the single greatest commercial hub in all of Mesoamerica, a place where 60,000 people will gather on major market days to exchange goods regulated by appointed judges who settle disputes and punish fraud. Flushed with this victory, Axayacatl turns westward. Beyond the volcanic highlands, in the lake-studded region of Michoacán, the Tarascan Empire of the Purepecha people stands as the one power the Mexica have never subdued. The Tarascans possess something no other Mesoamerican rival commands in such quantity: bronze. Their weapons carry edges harder than obsidian, less brittle, devastating against wooden shields and quilted cotton armor. The campaign is a catastrophe. Axayacatl marches a massive army into Tarascan territory, and near Tzintzuntzan, the Purepecha capital on the shores of Lake Pátzcuaro, his forces meet an enemy that will not break. The Tarascan army, equipped with bronze-tipped spears and axes, inflicts staggering losses. Accounts preserved in later sources suggest the Mexica lose the vast majority of their fighting force, perhaps 20,000 warriors or more. Axayacatl himself is wounded, carried from the field with injuries to his leg and thigh. The survivors straggle back to Tenochtitlan in humiliation. The western frontier hardens into a permanent boundary. The Tarascans fortify their border, and the Mexica never attempt a full invasion again. It is the empire's most significant military limitation, proof that expansion has edges, that obsidian and ideology cannot overcome bronze and determined resistance on unfamiliar terrain. Axayacatl spends his remaining years consolidating rather than conquering. He commissions a great carved stone, a massive basalt disc depicting the sun god Tonatiuh at its center, surrounded by the glyphs of previous cosmic ages and calendrical signs. This monumental work, later misidentified as a calendar stone, weighs over 24 metric tons and encodes the Mexica understanding of time, destruction, and renewal in exquisite low relief. Axayacatl dies in 1481. His successor, Tizoc, inherits an empire still nursing the wound of the Tarascan defeat. Tizoc proves a reluctant warrior. His coronation campaign yields few captives, an inauspicious beginning. He commissions a great commemorative stone carved with images of himself seizing enemy warriors by the hair. But the victories depicted feel aspirational rather than achieved. Military campaigns during his 5-year reign are modest, and the empire's expansion stalls. Discontent festers among the warrior elite and the priesthood. In 1486, Tizoc dies under circumstances that later sources describe as suspicious, possibly poisoned by members of his own court who find his leadership inadequate for an empire built on the promise of perpetual conquest. The throne passes to his brother Ahuitzotl, a man whose appetite for war and spectacle will push the empire to its absolute zenith. Ahuitzotl takes the reed mat in 1486 with the ferocity of a man who has waited too long in the shadow of hesitation. Where Tizoc faltered, Ahuitzotl surges. His coronation war targets the Aztec region to the northeast, and he returns with thousands of captives, a statement written in human lives that the empire's engine of conquest has restarted. The warrior elite exhales. The priesthood approves. The new Tlatoani is everything his predecessor was not, relentless, physically imposing, and possessed of an ambition that will stretch the Triple Alliance to distances no previous ruler imagined. His first great project is architectural. The Templar Mare, expanded repeatedly since Itzcoatl's reign, receives its most magnificent enlargement. The twin shrines atop the pyramid, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, god of war and sun, the other to Tlaloc, god of rain and agricultural fertility, are rebuilt and sheathed in fresh white stucco that blazes against the highland sky. Polychrome murals adorn the temple walls in reds, blues, and yellows derived from mineral pigments. Massive serpent heads carved from volcanic Tenochtitlan flank the stairways, their open jaws painted crimson. The structure rises approximately 60 meters above the sacred precinct, visible from every corner of the lake and from the mountains beyond. The rededication ceremony of 1487 is an event of extraordinary scale. Sources differ on precise numbers, but the ritual sacrifices conducted over 4 days are vast, drawing captives from campaigns across the empire. Processions stretch along the causeways and through the sacred precinct. Priests in blackened robes and matted hair ascend the steep steps. Drums thunder from dawn until darkness. Visiting dignitaries from allied and even enemy states are invited to witness the spectacle, a calculated display of imperial power meant to awe and terrify in equal measure. Tlaxcalan and Huexotzincan lords attend under safe conduct, observing from specially constructed viewing platforms. The message is unmistakable. Tenochtitlan commands resources, labor, and devotion on a scale no other Altepetl can rival. With the spiritual center renewed, Ahuitzotl turns outward. His armies campaign with unprecedented range. They push south through Oaxaca, subduing Mixtec and Zapotec communities. They descend into the tropical lowlands of Guerrero and press along the Pacific coast. The most distant conquests reach Soconusco, the cacao-rich province bordering the Maya territories near the Guatemala frontier, some 1,000 kilometers from Tenochtitlan. The empire swells to approximately 200,000 square kilometers, its tribute network encompassing hundreds of subject communities, delivering goods that flow ceaselessly into the island capital: cacao, cotton, rubber, liquid amber, quetzal feathers, jade, gold, and jaguar pelts. Yet Ahuitzotl's ambitions carry consequences that even military genius cannot control. In 1499, seeking to improve Tenochtitlan's freshwater supply, he orders the construction of a new aqueduct, drawing water from springs at Coyoacan on the southern lake shore. Engineers warn that the flow may be too powerful. The warnings prove prophetic. The aqueduct channels water into the city with such force that Tenochtitlan floods catastrophically. Streets become canals. Storehouses of grain are ruined. Adobe homes dissolve into mud. Ahuitzotl himself is reportedly injured during rescue efforts, striking his head against a stone lintel in a flooded passageway. The city requires extensive rebuilding, and the disaster tempers the triumphalism of the preceding years. Ahuitzotl dies in 1502, possibly from complications of injuries sustained during the flood. His reign has transformed the empire from a regional power into a continental force, its reach spanning from arid northern frontiers to humid tropical coasts. The Templo Mayor stands as the axis of a world sustained by tribute, warfare, and cosmic obligation. The causeways hum with commerce. The chinampas feed 250,000 souls. But the empire he leaves behind is stretched thin, its subject peoples bound more by fear than loyalty, its military commitments vast, its internal contradictions deepening with every new conquest. The throne now passes to a man of very different temperament, Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, a priest before he is a warrior, who will inherit the most powerful state in the Americas and preside over its unraveling. The city spreads across 13.5 square kilometers of reclaimed lakebed and engineered island, a metropolis of between 200,000 and 250,000 souls suspended on water between the snow-capped peaks of Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. At the turn of the 16th century, Tenochtitlan is among the largest cities on Earth, rivaling Constantinople and dwarfing any settlement in Western Europe. Its geometry is deliberate, sacred, and functional, a grid of canals and streets radiating from a central precinct where the divine and the human converge. 4 great causeways extend from the island to the mainland shores. The southern causeway runs to Iztapalapa, the western to Tlacopan, the northern to Tepeyac, and a shorter eastern spur connects to a landing near the lake. Each causeway is broad enough for 8 horsemen to ride abreast, built from packed earth and stone, interrupted at intervals by removable wooden bridges that serve as both flood control and military defense. Canoes glide beneath these gaps in an endless arterial flow of goods, passengers, and tribute. The city divides into 4 great campan, or quadrants, each aligned with a cardinal direction and a cosmological principle. Within these quadrants cluster the Kalpulli neighborhoods, perhaps 80 in total, each a semi-autonomous unit with its own temple, school, and communal lands. The Kalpulli organizes taxation, military conscription, and local justice. Streets of packed earth alternate with canals, so that nearly every household can be reached by foot or by water. Fresh water arrives through twin aqueducts. The primary conduit runs from the springs at Chapultepec along the Tlacopan Causeway, a double-channeled terracotta pipeline that allows one channel to flow while the other is cleaned. A second aqueduct from Coyoacan supplements the supply. Waste removal is equally systematic. Human waste is collected in canoes and transported to chinampa fields as fertilizer. Public latrines line the causeways. The streets are swept daily by a workforce of over 1,000 men. The chinampas themselves form an extraordinary lattice across the shallow southern waters of the lake. These rectangular garden plots are constructed by staking out boundaries with wooden posts, layering woven reeds and lake-bottom sediment, and anchoring the edges with willow trees whose roots bind the structure to the lake bed. Each chinampa yields multiple harvests annually: maize, beans, squash, amaranth, chili peppers, tomatoes, and flowers for the temple offerings. The agricultural productivity of this system sustains the immense urban population without dependence on rainfall agriculture alone. Cutting across the open lake from north to south runs the Great Dike of Nezahualcoyotl, a 16-kilometer stone and earth barrier that separates the brackish waters of the eastern lake from the fresher western waters surrounding the city. This feat of hydraulic engineering, originally constructed in the 1450s, controls flooding and maintains the salinity balance essential for chinampa cultivation and drinking water. At the city's heart lies the sacred precinct, a walled enclosure roughly 400 meters on each side, containing more than 70 structures. The Templo Mayor dominates, its twin staircases ascending 60 meters to the shrines of Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, painted in red and blue. Before its base rests the great circular Coyolxauhqui stone, carved in relief with the dismembered moon goddess. Nearby stands the Tzompantli, a wooden rack displaying thousands of skulls from sacrificial offerings, its posts darkened with age and resin. The ball court sits within the precinct, its sloped walls polished smooth, the stone rings mounted high on either side. Temples to Quetzalcoatl, Tezcatlipoca, and Xipe-Totec occupy their designated positions within the sacred geography. Beyond the precinct walls, the palaces of the Tlatoani and the high nobility spread across multiple courtyards, administrative chambers, judicial halls, aviaries housing hundreds of bird species, botanical gardens cultivating medicinal plants from every ecological zone of the empire, and armories stocked with obsidian-edged Macuahuitl swords and quilted cotton armor. The city hums with the sound of stone tools, the slap of tortillas on clay comals, the calls of merchants navigating canals heavy with produce. Smoke from copal incense drifts above temple rooftops into air that carries the mineral scent of the lake. This is the city that tribute built, that engineering sustains, and that faith sanctifies. A human achievement of staggering ambition resting on the thinnest membrane between water and sky. In 1502, when Ahuitzotl dies, possibly from a head wound suffered during the Great Flood 3 years earlier, the Council of Elders does not choose a warrior of blunt force. They choose a priest. Motecuzoma Xocoyotzin, the younger nephew of the dead Tlatoani and great-grandson of the first Motecuzoma, is found sweeping the steps of the shrine of Huitzilopochtli atop the Templo Mayor. He is approximately 34 years old, lean and contemplative, a man who has spent years inhaling copal smoke in darkened sanctuaries, fasting until his body thins to sinew and prayer. He has fought in campaigns and taken captives for sacrifice, fulfilling the martial requirements of rulership, but his temperament is that of a scholar, a reader of painted books, a seeker of omens in the movement of stars. His first acts upon taking the reed mat reveal a ruler intent on transformation from within. He purges the palace administration of commoner officials who had risen under Ahuitzotl's more permeable court. Positions of authority return exclusively to the Pipiltin, the hereditary nobility. New sumptuary laws dictate with exacting precision who may wear cotton, who may don sandals in the palace, who may drink cacao. The distance between the Tlatoani and his subjects widens into an almost sacred void. No one may look upon his face. His feet never touch bare ground. Attendants lay cotton mantles before each step. Meals arrive in processions of 300 dishes, served behind a gilded screen so that no one witnesses the ruler eat. The palace itself expands into a complex of some 300 rooms surrounding courtyards of polished stone. One wing houses a zoological garden where jaguars pace in stone enclosures and quetzal birds flash iridescent green in aviaries misted with water. Another wing contains a botanical garden arranged by medicinal and ritual properties, tended by specialist herbalists drawn from conquered provinces. Painters work in dedicated chambers producing codices on amate bark paper, recording tribute lists, genealogies, and astronomical observations. The palace functions as court, archive, treasury, and temple simultaneously. Yet beneath this elaboration of protocol, the empire strains. Tributary states in the Mixtec highlands of Oaxaca resist collection. Campaigns are launched, victories claimed, but the pattern of revolt and reconquest repeats with troubling regularity. The unconquered Tlaxcalan Confederation remains embedded in the heart of the empire's territory, like a stone the body cannot absorb, sustained by flower wars that provide sacrificial captives but never resolution. Moctezuma tightens control, demands greater tribute, sends his Pochteca merchants deeper into distant territories as both traders and intelligence gatherers. Then the omens begin. In 1509, a comet blazes across the night sky, its tail streaming like scattered quetzal plumes. In 1510, the temple of Huitzilopochtli catches fire under circumstances no one can explain, flames erupting from the wooden superstructure as if ignited from within. The waters of Lake Texcoco are said to boil without heat. A column of fire appears in the eastern sky at midnight, burning for a full year in the accounts preserved by later chroniclers. Fishermen pull a strange bird from the lake with a mirror of obsidian in its head, and in that mirror the stars wheel in unfamiliar patterns. Moctezuma consults his priests and diviners. He sends for dream interpreters from across the empire. The painted books are examined for precedent. The anxiety is not merely superstitious, it is cosmological. The Aztec universe operates in cycles of creation and destruction, and the fifth sun under which humanity lives is destined to end in catastrophic earthquakes. Every 52 years the new fire ceremony resets the cosmic clock, but between ceremonies the dread accumulates. The last new fire burned in 1507, and already the world seems to shudder. By 1518, reports arrive from the Gulf Coast of floating mountains, carrying pale strangers with weapons that sound like thunder. Moctezuma dispatches emissaries bearing gifts of gold and turquoise and featherwork of extraordinary refinement. The gifts are meant to awe, perhaps to persuade the strangers to depart. Instead, they sharpen appetite. The Tlatoani waits in his palace of 300 rooms, surrounded by painted prophecies and caged birds, governing an empire of millions from behind a gilded screen, while something unprecedented moves steadily inland from the sea. The cosmos rests on catastrophe. 4 suns have already perished, each one a world entire, each destroyed by its own elemental flaw. The first sun, Nahue Ocelotl, ended when jaguars devoured its inhabitants. The second, Nahue Ehecatl, was torn apart by hurricanes that twisted the people into monkeys. The third, Nahue Quiahuitl, drowned beneath a rain of fire. The fourth, Nahue Atl, collapsed in a flood that turned humanity into fish. The present age, the fifth sun, Nahue Olin, born from the self-sacrifice of the gods at Teotihuacan, will one day end in earthquakes. This is not mythology held at a comfortable distance. It is the operating logic of the empire, the reason the temples smoke with copal, the reason blood runs down the steps of the Templar Mare, the reason priests rise before dawn to offer thorns, driven through their earlobes and tongues. The sunstone, that massive basalt disc weighing nearly 25 tons and measuring nearly 12 feet across, encodes this cosmology in concentric rings of carved glyphs. At its center, the face of Tonatiuh, the sun god, extends his tongue in an expression of hunger. The 4 rectangles surrounding him name the 4 destroyed suns. Beyond them radiate the 20-day signs of the Tonalpohualli, the sacred calendar of 260 days, formed by interlocking cycles of 13 numbers and 20 named days. This ritual calendar governs divination, determines the fate of newborns, and dictates the timing of ceremonies. Alongside it runs the Xiuhpohualli, the solar calendar of 365 days divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus 5 unlucky hollow days called Nemontemi, when no business is conducted and no child willingly named. Every 52 years the 2 calendars align, completing one Xiuhmolpilli, one binding of the years. The last such convergence falls in 1507. On the Hill of the Star, Huixachtlan, southeast of Tenochtitlan, priests extinguish every flame in the valley. Darkness swallows the empire. Pregnant women are locked indoors, their faces covered with maguey masks, lest they transform into monsters. Children are kept awake, pinched if they drowse, because sleep on this night risks permanent transformation into mice. On the summit, priests watch the Pleiades cross the meridian. When the star cluster reaches its zenith, a fire drill is pressed against the opened chest of a sacrificial captive. The new flame catches. Runners carry torches down the hillside to the Templo Mare, and from there to every hearth in every Calpulli, every temple in every subject city. The world has earned another 52 years. 18 monthly festivals structure the solar year with relentless precision. Atlcahualo in the first month honors Tlaloc with the sacrifice of children whose tears ensure rain. Toxcatl in the 5th month celebrates Tezcatlipoca through a year-long ritual in which a chosen captive lives as the god's embodiment, adorned in flowers and gold, playing flutes through the streets before ascending the temple steps. Ochpanitztli in the 11th month belongs to Totsi, the Earth Mother, marked by sweeping ceremonies and the flaying of a sacrificial victim whose skin a priest wears to embody agricultural renewal under the aspect of Zipetotec. The priestly class, the Tlamakazqui, maintains this calendar with astronomical exactitude. Trained in the Kalmakak from youth, their hair matted with sacrificial blood, their skin blackened with soot, they read the painted screenfold codices that map the heavens and the underworld alike. They track Venus with a precision that allows prediction of its appearances within a margin of hours across centuries. They understand that the Templo Mare itself is an axis mundi, the point where the 13 heavens and 9 underworlds converge, its twin shrines to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc replicating the sacred mountains of Coatepec and Tonacatepetl. Every stone laid in its construction carries cosmological weight. Every offering buried in its foundations, jade beads, crocodile skulls, coral from distant oceans, obsidian blades, anchors the human world to forces that could, at any moment, choose annihilation. The 5th sun burns, but it burns on borrowed time, sustained only by devotion measured in smoke and blood and the ceaseless turning of interlocked calendars. But the cosmos does not feed itself on theology alone. The 200,000 mouths of Tenochtitlan require something more elemental than prayer. They require maize, and the maize requires earth, and the earth must be conjured from water. Along the shallow southern shores of Lake Xochimilco and Lake Chalco, where freshwater springs seep upward through volcanic sediment, the Chinampa system transforms the lake itself into farmland. The method is ancient, predating the Mexico arrival by centuries, but under imperial demand it reaches an intensity unmatched anywhere in the Americas. Workers drive willow stakes into the lake bed, weaving them with reeds and aquatic vegetation to form rectangular plots roughly 30 meters long and 2.5 meters wide. They dredge rich black mud from the lake floor, layering it thick upon these woven foundations. The willow stakes take root, their spreading tendrils anchoring each plot against the current. Narrow canals separate one chinampa from the next, allowing canoes to pass between them carrying seed, harvest, and fertilizer. The productivity is staggering. The constant moisture wicking upward through the root zone, combined with the nutrient density of lacustrine mud, permits as many as 7 harvests per year. Maize, amaranth, squash, chili peppers, tomatoes, and flowers grow in dense succession. Seedlings germinate in portable mud blocks along canal edges before transplanting to the Chinampa surface, ensuring no growing days are wasted. The system feeds not only the capital, but generates surplus that flows northward by canoe to Tlatelolco, where agriculture becomes commerce. The Tlatelolco market operates daily, though every 5th day brings the great market that draws an estimated 60,000 buyers and sellers into a single plaza larger than any in contemporary Europe. Goods arrive organized by category. One section for raw cotton and finished mantles, another for obsidian blades and copper bells, another for medicinal herbs whose sellers know the properties of hundreds of plants. Cacao beans serve as the standard unit of exchange. A turkey egg costs 1 bean, a tomato costs 1, a turkey costs 100, a cotton mantle roughly 65. Quahtli standardized cotton cloaks function as higher denomination currency for larger transactions. Judges appointed by the market authority sit in an elevated tribunal, settling disputes on the spot, punishing fraud with immediate penalties. Beyond the market's visible bustle operates a quieter and more dangerous network. The Pochteca, long-distance merchant guilds headquartered in Tlatelolco and several other cities, travel routes stretching from the Gulf Coast Huastec region to the cacao groves of Soconusco near the Guatemala border, and deep into the Maya lowlands of Tabasco and Campeche. They carry obsidian, copper, cloth, and ornamental goods outward, returning with quetzal feathers, jaguar pelts, jade, gold, rubber, and the precious cacao that lubricates the entire economy. Their journeys last months, sometimes years, crossing hostile territory with armed escorts. They serve a dual purpose the empire does not publicly acknowledge. As intelligence gatherers, mapping the military strength and political alliances of distant peoples, reporting directly to the Tlatoani and his war council. Their information shapes the campaigns that follow their footsteps. The Pochteca occupy an unusual social position, wealthy enough to rival the Pipiltin nobility, yet formally classified below them, forbidden from displaying their riches openly. They hold their own religious ceremonies honoring Yakatecutli, their patron deity, and conduct initiation rites that bind apprentices to the guild for life. Their warehouses in Tlatelolco hold goods whose combined value exceeds the tribute of entire provinces. This is the economic engine beneath the temples and the armies, mud dredged from lake bottoms, seeds pressed into dark soil, canoes gliding through pre-dawn canals loaded with amaranth and squash blossoms, cacao beans counted out on woven mats, merchants departing southward under starlight with trade goods and secret orders. Every chinampa plot, every market stall, every Pochteca caravan sustains the imperial machinery that allows priests to burn copal and warriors to carry obsidian-edged swords into battle. The empire floats, quite literally, on agriculture and exchange. But the empire's wealth does not merely flow through markets and storehouses. It is transformed by hands trained from childhood in the ancient disciplines of stone, feather, gold, and pigment into objects of such refinement that they collapse the distance between the material and the divine. In the workshops of Tenochtitlan, artisans labor within a system as hierarchical and specialized as the priesthood itself. The amanteca, the feather workers, occupy their own quarter in the city, a hereditary guild whose members trace their craft back generations. They work with feathers sourced from across the empire and beyond, the iridescent green plumes of the quetzal bird from the cloud forests of Soconusco and Guatemala, the scarlet breast feathers of the roseate spoonbill, the turquoise shimmer of the cotinga, the golden yellow of tropical parrots. These feathers arrive in tribute bundles and through Pochteca trade networks, and the amanteca sort them by color, texture, and flexibility before binding them with maguey fiber thread onto cotton or bark cloth backing. The headdress associated with motecuzoma, a sweeping fan of over 400 quetzal tail feathers interspersed with blue cotinga plumes and gold medallions, now preserved in Vienna's Welt Museum, represents the pinnacle of this tradition. Each feather is individually attached, layered to catch light at precise angles, so the entire piece shimmers between green and gold as it moves. Stone carvers work volcanic tezontle and harder basalt with tools of flint and obsidian, shaping monumental sculptures that encode cosmological narratives in 3 dimensions. At the base of the Templo Mayor lies the great Coyolxauhqui stone, over 3 meters in diameter, depicting the dismembered moon goddess in exquisite low relief, her severed limbs adorned with bells, her torso twisted in the moment of defeat by Huitzilopochtli. Every joint, every ornament, every serpent belt clasp is rendered with anatomical and symbolic precision. Lapidary workers grind jade, jadeite, and turquoise into mosaic masks and pectoral ornaments using abrasive sand and water on stone grinding platforms. Jade carries the deepest symbolic weight in Mesoamerican thought. It signifies water, life, preciousness, the breath of the living. A single jade bead placed in the mouth of the dead serves as the heart substitute for the journey through Mictlan. Turquoise mosaic masks, assembled from hundreds of tiny tessera pieces cemented with pine resin onto wooden or skull bases, represent deities and transform their wearers into divine vessels. Goldsmiths employ the lost wax casting method, modeling intricate forms in beeswax, encasing them in clay, melting out the wax, and pouring molten gold into the void. The resulting lip plugs, ear spools, pectoral discs, and bells achieve a delicacy that astonishes even the Spanish, who will later melt most of them into ingots. These craftsmen work in gold, silver, and copper alloys, producing objects whose thinness and detail rival anything produced in contemporary Europe. Codex painters, the Tlaquiloque, work on sheets of amate bark paper or deerskin, sizing the surface with white lime gesso before applying pigments derived from mineral and organic sources. Cochineal insects yield a deep crimson. Indigo plants produce blue. Carbon provides black, and ochre clays supply yellow and orange. These painters are not mere illustrators but keepers of knowledge, encoding tribute records, ritual calendars, genealogies, and historical narratives in a pictographic system that trained readers interpret with precision. Each glyph carries layers of meaning. A burning temple signifies conquest, a footprint trail marks migration, a speech scroll denotes authority. Obsidian, the volcanic glass of the highlands, serves both practical and sacred purposes. Skilled knappers produce prismatic blades so thin they are nearly transparent, sharper than modern surgical steel. Polished obsidian mirrors, associated with the god Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, serve as instruments of divination and symbols of hidden knowledge. Every object produced in these workshops carries dual purpose. Beauty is never separate from meaning. A turquoise mask is simultaneously an aesthetic triumph and a theological statement. A feathered shield is both battlefield protection and cosmic diagram. The artisans of Tenochtitlan do not decorate the world. They render it legible, translating the invisible architecture of the sacred into forms that can be worn, held, offered, and understood. But the artisans who render the cosmos legible do not labor in isolation. They live within a structure older than the empire itself, the Calpulli, the fundamental neighborhood unit that organizes nearly every dimension of ordinary existence in Tenochtitlan. Each of the city's 4 great quarters contains dozens of these communities, and within them the vast majority of the population, the Masehualtin, the commoners, are born, educated, married, and buried. The Calpulli is simultaneously a kinship network, a landholding corporation, a tax district, and a religious congregation. Each one maintains its own temple, its own patron deity, its own communal granary. Land belongs not to individuals, but to the Calpulli collectively, parceled out to families for cultivation. A household that fails to work its assigned plot for 2 consecutive years forfeits the right to hold it. Labor, not ownership, confers legitimacy. Daily life begins before dawn. Women kneel at stone metats, grinding soaked maize kernels into dough for tortillas, the act so central to household identity that a girl receives a miniature metate at birth. The staple diet revolves around maize in its many preparations: tortillas, tamales wrapped in corn husks, and atole, a warm gruel thickened with ground grain. Beans provide essential protein. Chili peppers appear at nearly every meal. Tomatoes, squash, and amaranth supplement the table. Meat is rare for commoners, occasional turkey, dog, or lake fish. Pulque, the fermented sap of the maguey cactus, is permitted only for the elderly or during designated festivals. Public drunkenness outside these sanctioned occasions carries severe punishment: loss of property for a first offense, death for a second. Children enter formal education around age 15. Sons of commoners attend the Telpochkali, the house of youth, maintained by each Calpulli. Here they learn warfare, civic duty, construction labor, and the songs and dances required for religious ceremonies. Discipline is harsh. The children of the nobility, the Pipiltin, attend the Kalmakak instead, attached to major temples, where training emphasizes priestly knowledge, calendrical science, rhetoric, law, and the interpretation of painted manuscripts. Marriage typically occurs around age 20 for men and 15 to 18 for women, negotiated between families with the aid of elder matchmakers called Quihuatlanque. The ceremony centers on the literal tying of the couple's garments, his cloak knotted to her blouse, symbolizing an indissoluble bond. The bride is carried to her new household on the back of an older woman, torchlight illuminating the procession through narrow streets. Clothing itself marks social rank with legal precision. Commoners wear garments of maguey fiber, the rough ixtal cloth that distinguishes them visually from the cotton-clad nobility. Sumptuary laws enforced under Motecuzoma Xocoyotzin dictate the length of cloaks, the permissible colors, even the style of sandals. To wear cotton without entitlement is a criminal offense. The legal system governing these distinctions operates through courts at multiple levels. Each calpulli has local judges. Above them sit district courts, and at the apex the Supreme Tribunal in Tenochtitlan, where cases of appeal are heard by panels of senior judges appointed by the Tlatoani. Proceedings are recorded in painted documents. Judges found accepting bribes face removal and public disgrace, in extreme cases, death. The temazcal, the communal steam bath built of stone and heated by a wood fire against an exterior wall, serves as both hygienic practice and therapeutic ritual. Families bathe together. Pregnant women use the temazcal before and after childbirth, under the guidance of a midwife who invokes Tlazolteotl, goddess of purification. The steam bath is where the body is cleansed, but also where social bonds are renewed in the intimate warmth of shared ritual. Within this intricate lattice of obligation and custom, the Mactahualtan are not passive subjects. They serve in armies, tend chinampas, staff construction crews that maintain causeways and temples, and pay tribute in goods and labor. Yet they also possess rights to their calpulli land, to legal recourse, to education for their children. A commoner who captures an enemy warrior on the battlefield can ascend in status, earning the right to wear cotton and feathers. The system is rigid, but not entirely sealed. Merit in war opens narrow passages upward through the social architecture, ensuring that the empire's most essential institution, its military, never lacks for motivated soldiers willing to risk everything for the chance to rise. But the warrior who ascends through battlefield valor enters a world where another kind of conquest is prized, one waged not with obsidian blades, but with language itself. In the palace courtyards of Texcoco and Tenochtitlan, in the torchlit halls of the Calmecac schools, the Nahua intellectual tradition reaches its most refined expression in the philosophy of Inzochitl in Cuicatl, flower and song. This paired metaphor, a diffracismo in Nahuatl rhetorical tradition, names the highest aspiration of human thought, the pursuit of truth through beauty, the attempt to say something lasting in a world the Aztecs know to be fragile. The tradition finds its supreme voice in Nezahualcoyotl, the poet-king of Texcoco, who rules from 1429 to 1472. His surviving compositions, preserved in later colonial-era collections like the Romances de los Señores de la Nueva España, circle obsessively around mortality. Flowers wither. Jade shatters. Even the grandest lords vanish like smoke. Yet Nezahualcoyotl does not surrender to despair. His verses seek neltelistli, a concept translated variously as truth, rootedness, or authenticity, the quality of a life grounded in what is real rather than what is fleeting. Poetry becomes the instrument through which the ephemeral touches the eternal. the one human act that might outlast the poet's own breath. This is not a solitary pursuit. Poetry in the Aztec world is performance. In palace gardens fragrant with magnolia and tobacco flower, composers present new works before gatherings of nobles and priests. The voice rises and falls in measured cadences, accompanied by the deep resonance of the huhuetl, an upright cylindrical drum carved from a single log and covered with stretched deer skin. Beside it sounds the teponastle, a horizontal slit drum whose two carved tongues produce distinct pitches when struck with rubber-tipped mallets. Bone rasps, turtle-shell percussion, clay flutes, and conch-shell trumpets layer into complex sonic textures. Rhythm is sacred. A drummer who loses the beat during a temple ceremony faces severe punishment, for music is not entertainment, it is communication with the divine. Dance extends this communication into the body. The great festivals demand choreographed performances involving hundreds of participants moving in concentric circles within the sacred precinct. Dancers wear costumes of extraordinary elaboration, feathered headdresses, turquoise mosaic pectorals, ankle rattles of copper bells, capes of ocelot skin. Each gesture carries cosmological meaning. The movements replicate the cycles of celestial bodies, the agricultural calendar, the mythic deeds of gods. At the feast of Tenochtitlan, dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, the dancing continues through the night, torchlight catching the iridescent shimmer of quetzal plumes as bodies turn in unison. The rubber ball game, Ullamalistli, channels this same cosmic energy into athletic contest. Played on an eye-shaped court, a narrow alley flanked by sloping walls, the game pits teams against each other using a solid rubber ball weighing roughly 4 kilograms. Players strike the ball with hips, knees, and buttocks, protected by leather hip guards. Stone rings mounted high on the court walls offer a nearly impossible target. Passing the ball through one ends the match instantly. The game reenacts the journey of the sun through the underworld, the eternal struggle between light and darkness that the Five Suns myth encodes. Courts exist throughout Tenochtitlan and across the empire, from provincial towns to the great ceremonial centers. Together, poetry, music, dance, and the ball game form a coherent intellectual world in which the Aztecs interrogate existence itself. The questions Nezahualcoyotl poses, whether anything endures, whether truth can be spoken on earth, whether flowers and songs alone survive the destruction of worlds, are not ornamental. They constitute a philosophical tradition as rigorous in its way as any the 15th century produces anywhere on the planet. And they pulse through every festival, every drumbeat, every arcing trajectory of a rubber ball against a stone wall, binding the empire's spiritual life into a single, restless inquiry into what it means to be alive in a cosmos that has already ended 4 times before. In the early months of 1517, a fleet of 3 ships under Francisco Hernández de Córdoba departs Cuba and sails westward into waters no European vessel has yet charted. The expedition reaches the coast of Yucatan, where Maya towns of dressed stone and lime plaster astonish sailors accustomed to the wooden villages of the Caribbean. But the encounters turn violent. At Champoton, Maya warriors inflict devastating casualties, killing more than 50 Spaniards and wounding Hernández de Córdoba himself so severely that he dies shortly after returning to Cuba. The expedition fails as conquest, but it succeeds as revelation. Word spreads through the Spanish Caribbean that somewhere beyond the horizon lies a civilization of stone cities, woven cotton, and gold. The following year, 1518, Governor Diego Velázquez of Cuba dispatches Juan de Grijalva with 4 ships to probe further. Grijalva's fleet traces the Gulf Coast northward, past the mouths of rivers emptying from the interior highlands. Along the Tabasco and Veracruz coasts, Totonac and Maya intermediaries offer gold ornaments in trade, small pieces, but enough to confirm the rumors. Grijalva does not attempt settlement. He returns to Cuba with samples and stories, and the reports reach a restless, ambitious minor official named Hernán Cortés. In February of 1519, Cortés sails from Cuba with approximately 500 soldiers, 16 horses, and several small cannons aboard 11 ships. He carries authority from Velázquez that he will soon exceed and ultimately repudiate. The fleet makes landfall first in Tabasco, where a military engagement produces not only submission, but a group of enslaved women offered as gifts. Among them is a Nahuatl-speaking woman of noble origin, whom the Spanish baptize Marina, and whom history remembers as Malintzin. Her command of both Nahuatl and Chontal Maya, paired with the Castilian Maya skills of the shipwrecked friar Geronimo de Aguilar, creates a chain of translation that gives Cortés something no previous expedition possessed, a voice that reaches into the heart of the Aztec world. By April, Cortés establishes the settlement of Villa Rica de la Vera Cruz on the Gulf Coast, a legal maneuver that grants him authority independent of Velázquez. The Totonac city of Chempoala, with its whitewashed pyramids gleaming against tropical green, becomes his first major indigenous contact in the imperial orbit. The Totonac lord communicates a critical piece of intelligence. The Aztec tribute system is resented. Chempoala and its neighbors chafe under Tenochtitlan's demands. Cortés recognizes the fracture and presses it. The march inland begins in August of 1519. The column of Spanish soldiers, accompanied by Totonac porters and warriors, climbs from the humid coastal lowlands into the pine-forested highlands. The Republic of Tlaxcala, fiercely independent and surrounded by Aztec tributary states, initially resists. Through September, Tlaxcalan armies engage the Spanish in a series of pitched battles, testing the strangers' cavalry, steel, and gunpowder. The Tlaxcalans suffer significant losses but are not destroyed. Negotiations follow, and by late September an alliance is sealed, one that will prove more consequential than any single battle. Tlaxcala provides thousands of warriors, porters, and intelligence about the interior roads. From Tlaxcala, the column advances to Cholula, a sacred city dominated by the largest pyramid by volume in the Americas. Here, acting on warnings, possibly from Malintzin, that Cholula's leaders plan an ambush at Motecuzoma's direction, Cortés orders a preemptive attack. In the span of hours, thousands of Cholulans are killed in the temple precinct and surrounding streets. The massacre sends shockwaves through the highland cities. It is a calculated act of terror designed to demonstrate the cost of resistance. Beyond Cholula, the road climbs between the snow-capped volcanoes Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. The pass opens onto the Valley of Mexico, and the lake system stretches below, shimmering, vast, studded with cities. Tenochtitlan sits at its center, connected by causeways to the mainland, its temples catching the November light. The philosophical world of flower and song, the cosmos renewed by fire every 52 years, the empire sustained by chinampa and tribute, all of it now faces something its priests never predicted and its calendars never named. On the 8th of November, 1519, the southern causeway from Iztapalapa stretches across the lake like a stone ribbon drawn taut between two worlds. It is wide enough for 8 horsemen to ride abreast, flanked on both sides by the grey-green waters of Lake Texcoco. Thousands of canoes cluster along its edges, their occupants silent, watching. The causeway runs perfectly straight for nearly 2 leagues towards the island city, and at its far end, the temples of the sacred precinct rise against the morning sky like a white and crimson wall. Cortés advances with roughly 400 Spanish soldiers, several thousand Tlaxcalan warriors, and the weight of every alliance forged since the coast. The column moves slowly. At a gap in the causeway where a removable wooden bridge spans the channel, a procession emerges from the city. Moctezuma Xocoyotzin approaches carried on a litter adorned with green quetzal plumes and gold fittings. Attendants sweep the ground before him and lay cotton mantles so his sandaled feet never touch bare stone. The Tlatoani descends. The 2 leaders exchange gifts, a necklace of glass beads and gold from the Spanish side, garlands of flowers, and a double strand of gold and jade from the Mexica sovereign. The meeting is formal, measured, dense with protocol, whose meanings each side interprets through entirely different frameworks. The Spanish contingent enters the city along broad avenues lined with flat-roofed adobe houses, whitewashed and immaculate. Canals run parallel to the streets, thick with canoe traffic. The sacred precinct opens before them, over 70 structures enclosed within a serpent wall, the Coatepantli, its carved stone heads painted in vivid polychrome. The Templo Mayor dominates everything, its twin shrines to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc crowned with painted roof combs visible from every quarter of the city. Moctezuma lodges the newcomers in the palace of Axayacatl, his father's former residence on the western edge of the sacred precinct. The complex is vast, hundreds of rooms arranged around interior courtyards, walls hung with cotton tapestries and featherwork panels. Within days, the Spaniards discover a sealed chamber behind a freshly plastered wall. Inside lies a treasury accumulated over generations: gold discs, jade figurines, turquoise mosaic masks, feathered shields, and bars of gold stacked in wooden frames. The wealth confirms every rumor that drew the expedition inland. Yet the position is precarious. The Spaniards occupy a city of 200,000 on an island accessible only by causeways whose bridges can be removed in minutes. Within weeks, Cortés moves to seize Moctezuma himself, holding the Tlatoani under a form of house arrest within his own palace. The pretext is a skirmish on the Gulf Coast in which Totonac allies and Spanish soldiers have been killed. Moctezuma acquiesces, though whether from strategic calculation, religious uncertainty, or coercion remains debated by every source that records the event. The Tlatoani continues to govern nominally, issuing orders and receiving tribute, but power drains visibly from his authority with each passing week. Months pass in this suspended tension. In the spring of 1520, word reaches Cortés that a rival Spanish expedition under Pánfilo de Narváez has landed at Veracruz with orders to arrest him. Cortés departs the city with the majority of his forces, leaving approximately 120 soldiers under Pedro de Alvarado to hold the palace and guard Moctezuma. In May, the great festival of Toxcatl begins in the sacred precinct, the most important ceremony honoring Tezcatlipoca, Lord of the Smoking Mirror. Mexican nobles gather in the courtyard of the temple, unarmed, adorned in their finest regalia of gold and feathers, dancing to the rhythm of hue-huetel drums. Alvarado, claiming intelligence of an imminent uprising, orders the precinct gates sealed. His soldiers fall upon the celebrants. The killing is systematic and devastating. Warriors, priests, and nobles are cut down in the enclosed courtyard. Blood pools on the polished stone floors where, days before, copal incense drifted upward towards the twin shrines. The city erupts. Bridges are pulled from the causeways. The remaining Spaniards barricade themselves inside Axayacatl's palace with their captive sovereign, surrounded now by a population transformed from uneasy hosts into furious besiegers. Cortés returns from the coast in late June of 1520, having defeated Pánfilo de Narváez and absorbed his soldiers, only to find a city seething beyond any possibility of negotiation. The precinct reeks of death. The Mexica have not forgiven the Tenochtitlan massacre. Stones rain from rooftops onto the Spanish compound. Moctezuma is brought to the palace roof, perhaps to calm his people, perhaps as a final desperate gesture by captors who have exhausted every other stratagem. What follows remains disputed across sources. Stones strike the Tlatoani, and within days he is dead. Some accounts say the wounds killed him. Others insist the Spaniards themselves ended his life when his usefulness expired. His body is delivered to the Mexica, and the grief that greets it is laced with rage. Cuitláhuac, his brother, is swiftly elected Tlatoani, and under his command the siege of the palace intensifies. On the night of June 30th, 1520, Cortés orders a retreat. Rain falls on the lake. The causeways have been severed, bridges pulled, gaps opened over dark water. The column moves westward along the Tacuba causeway under cover of darkness, burdened with gold stripped from Axayacatl's treasure rooms. Soldiers have stuffed their armor with ingots and chains. The weight becomes their executioner. When the Mexica discover the retreat, war canoes swarm the causeway from both sides. Warriors surge through the breaches. The column fragments. Horses plunge into the canal gaps. Men drown under the weight of stolen treasure. Tlaxcalan allies, thousands of them, die in the chaos of the broken causeway. By dawn, more than 600 Spaniards and perhaps 4,000 allied warriors lie dead. The survivors stagger into the hills east of Tacuba, shattered and stripped of nearly everything they carried. Later chroniclers call it La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Cortés regroups in Tlaxcala, whose leaders calculate that the Spanish, even broken, remain useful against their ancient Mexica enemies. Through the autumn and winter of 1520, a new campaign takes shape. Shipwrights from the coast construct 13 brigantines in Tlaxcala, their timbers hauled overland by thousands of porters. A coalition army swells to more than 75,000 indigenous warriors drawn from Tlaxcala, Huejotzingo, Cholula, and disaffected tributary states. But the most devastating weapon arrives invisibly. Smallpox carried by an infected member of Narváez's expedition spreads through the Valley of Mexico with merciless efficiency. The disease is entirely unknown to Mesoamerican immune systems. It moves through the dense neighborhoods of Tenochtitlan house by house. Cuitláhuac, the Tlatoani who organized the victorious defense of the city, dies of smallpox after only 80 days of rule. The disease kills warriors, priests, and commoners without distinction. Entire Calpulli are hollowed out. The population that had numbered over 200,000 begins to collapse before any Spanish soldier returns. Cuauhtémoc, a young nobleman of perhaps 25 years, is chosen as the new Tlatoani in the midst of this catastrophe. He inherits a city weakened by plague, its granaries depleted, its alliances fraying as subject peoples sense the empire's vulnerability. In May of 1521, the siege begins. Cortés launches his brigantines on Lake Texcoco, seizing control of the water that had always been Tenochtitlan's greatest defense. The Chapultepec aqueduct is cut, severing the city's fresh water supply. The coalition forces advance along all three causeways simultaneously. The Mexica fight with extraordinary tenacity, pulling back into the city's labyrinth of canals and streets. Each block becomes a fortress. Cortés orders captured buildings demolished to prevent ambush, filling canals with rubble to allow his forces passage. The city that had astonished the Spaniards with its beauty is systematically dismantled. Day after day through June and July, the perimeter tightens. Starvation joins disease as an ally of the besiegers. The defenders eat leather, insects, lake grass. The stench of unburied dead fills the air above the shrinking Mexica-held districts. Yet Cuauhtémoc refuses surrender, organizing counterattacks that on at least one occasion capture dozens of Spanish soldiers alive. By early August of 1521, the Mexica hold only a narrow quarter of their once magnificent city. The sacred precinct has fallen. The twin shrines atop the Templo Maya, where copal smoke once rose to greet the sun, stand gutted and silent. Rubble chokes the canals that had carried flower-laden canoes between gleaming white neighborhoods. The geometric precision of Tenochtitlan's grid has been reduced to a wasteland of collapsed walls and shattered tezontle stone. The stench is unbearable. Bodies lie in houses in waterways beneath mounds of adobe. The living are skeletal, their skin marked by the pox that arrived months before the brigantines. Cuauhtémoc, the last Tlatoani, commands from the district of Tlatelolco, the great marketplace now emptied of its 60,000 daily traders. Warriors still fight from rooftops and barricades improvised from temple stones, but their obsidian-edged macuahuitl cannot hold back the systematic advance of a coalition army, numbering tens of thousands. Tlaxcalan, Texcocan, and Chalca warriors press inward alongside Spanish crossbowmen and harquebusiers. The 13 brigantines Cortés had built in Tlaxcala and carried overland in pieces now patrol every remaining stretch of open water, cutting off any hope of resupply or escape by canoe. On the 13th of August, 1521, the day one serpent in the Aztec calendar, the end comes not on a battlefield, but on the lake. Cuauhtémoc attempts to flee by canoe with a small retinue, seeking perhaps to reach the mainland and continue resistance. A brigantine commanded by Garcia Holguin intercepts the vessel on the waters of Lake Texcoco. The young Tlatoani, barely 25 years old, is brought before Cortés. The empire that had commanded tribute from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific, that had fed 250,000 souls from floating gardens, that had raised a 60-meter pyramid to the gods of rain and war, ceases to exist as a sovereign power. The silence that follows is the silence of devastation beyond reckoning. Between 100,000 and 240,000 people have perished during the 75-day siege from the combined effects of combat, starvation, contaminated water, and smallpox. Entire Calpulli neighborhoods have been erased. The chinampas that once produced 7 harvests a year lie abandoned, their willow root foundations rotting in fouled water. The skull rack, the ball court, the House of Eagles, all are rubble or soon will be. Within weeks, Cortés orders the Reconstruction to begin, not as restoration, but as erasure. Tenochtitlan is to become Mexico City, capital of New Spain. Indigenous laborers, many of them former Mexica subjects, are conscripted to clear the ruins and lay foundations for colonial structures. The great platform of the Templo Mayor becomes the site for a Catholic cathedral. Stones carved with the faces of Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli are turned face down and buried in foundations, becoming invisible, load-bearing elements of a new civilization built literally upon the old. The causeways are widened into roads. The canals are gradually filled. The lake itself will, over centuries, be drained. Cuauhtémoc survives in Spanish custody for nearly 4 years, a prisoner paraded as proof of conquest. In 1525, during Cortés's ill-fated expedition to Honduras through the jungles of the Petén, the last Tlatoani is accused of conspiracy and hanged from a ceiba tree. His death extinguishes the final living thread of Mexica sovereignty, though not of Mexica memory. The sacred precinct lies buried. The painted codices that recorded the movements of Venus, the genealogies of rulers, the quantities of tribute owed by 400 subject towns, most are burned or lost. Yet the destruction is not total. Some codices survive, hidden or preserved by indigenous nobles who navigate the new colonial order. The Nahuatl language persists in markets, in households, in the prayers that blend old gods with new saints. The roots of the civilization run deeper than any foundation stone, deeper than the rubble filling the canals, deeper than the colonial grid imposed upon the island where an eagle once perched on a cactus and a people believed they had found their destiny. In the decades after the fall, a Franciscan friar named Bernardino de Sahagún begins a project of extraordinary ambition. Arriving in New Spain in 1529, he spends more than 4 decades interviewing Nahua elders, scholars, and priests in their own language, recording their knowledge of medicine, astronomy, history, ritual, philosophy, and daily life. The result, completed around 1590, is the Florentine Codex, 12 books written in Nahuatl and Spanish, illustrated with hundreds of paintings by indigenous artists. It preserves the texture of a world that colonial policy seeks to erase. Alongside it, other manuscripts survive. The Codex Mendoza, commissioned around 1541, catalogues the tribute rolls of the empire in meticulous painted detail. The Codex Bourbonicus records the sacred calendar. These fragile pages of amate bark and European paper become arcs, carrying an entire civilization's memory across centuries of silence. Nahuatl itself refuses to die. Colonial administrators adopt it as a lingua franca for governance across central Mexico. Indigenous communities continue speaking it in homes, fields, and markets long after Spanish becomes the language of power. Today, approximately 1.7 million people speak Nahuatl, concentrated in the Sierra Norte de Puebla, the highlands of Guerrero, and the valleys of Veracruz. Words of Nahuatl origin have traveled further still, entering nearly every language on earth. Chocolate from Xocolatl, tomato from tomatl, avocado from ahuacatl, chili from Chile. The language lives not as a relic, but as a river still flowing. In Xochimilco, at the southern edge of modern Mexico City, the chinampas endure. Farmers still cultivate plots of rich, dark soil, bordered by canals, growing flowers, lettuce, and herbs, using techniques refined over 6 centuries. The trajineras glide across water that once connected to the vast lake system feeding Tenochtitlan. The agricultural genius of the Mexica persists in soil and root and season. Beneath the modern capital, the old city waits. On the 21st of February 1978, electrical workers digging near the cathedral in the Zocalo strike a massive carved stone. It depicts Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess, dismembered by her brother Huitzilopochtli, the same myth that anchored the spiritual meaning of the Templo Maya. The discovery launches the Templo Maya project, which over subsequent decades uncovers more than 100 offerings and 7 construction phases of the Great Pyramid, buried just meters below the colonial and modern streets. Obsidian knives, jade beads, coral from distant oceans, sacrificial remains, and miniature stone temples emerge from the earth. The sacred precinct reveals itself layer by layer, an axis mundi buried but unbroken. The Aztec calendar stone, unearthed in 1790 near the same site, becomes Mexico's most recognizable artifact. Its concentric rings of cosmological time reproduced on murals, currency, and classroom walls across the nation. The eagle devouring the serpent atop a nopal cactus, the founding vision of Tenochtitlan, occupies the center of the Mexican flag. National identity draws continuously from this deep well. The philosophical tradition of in Xochitl in Cuicatl, flower and song, endures as a reminder that the Mexica world was never only empire and sacrifice. It was also poetry, inquiry, and the persistent human question of what endures when all things pass. The answer, it seems, is memory itself, carried in language, in soil, in stone, in the painted pages of codices that survived fire and conquest, in the voices of communities who still speak the words their ancestors spoke when the valley was a lake and the city rose shining from the water. Thank you for joining this journey through the complete story of the Aztec civilization. If these voices from the past have moved or illuminated, consider subscribing so that future explorations of history's great civilizations find their way to you as well.